So this is meant to be the penultimate video. It's likely to be 2 videos. The amount of material I need to cover. You're covering the book of Revelation. It could last months, years, couldn't it? So what we've established so far is that in 1874 was the date that C.T. Russell believed that the last days began and Jesus became invisibly present. We've subsequently learnt that that was 100 years out. So actually, 1974-75 is actually that date. But of course, Jehovah's Witnesses have adopted 1914 because that was the end of the Gentile times, and that was chosen by C.T. Russell as the date for Armageddon. Of course, it didn't happen, as we know. But that didn't stop him. He realised there was a greater work to be done. And so what's happened is Jehovah's Witnesses established that Jesus started reigning, or he sat on it. He came to his throne and the last days began. And we've established previously that Jesus needed to choose a group of Christians to represent his interests on earth. And the reason being was because Christendom, the churches of Christendom, including the Catholic Church, failed to represent his true beliefs, his identity, for example, as Almighty God himself, as Jehovah, and the kingdom of Christ being a non-political entity. Whereas even today you have the religious leaders of the world, including Christendom and the Pope, supporting the United Nations. Now the question is, what is the United Nations today? Is it the 8th king? Because Jehovah's Witnesses talk about there being 7 kings of world Bible power. I'm just going to mention them briefly, and then I'll refer to something in jw.org. What we had first is the 7 kings. Now they're likened to the sea, coming out of the sea of mankind. In Isaiah 57 it talks about the sea being boisterous and humans. So the governments have come from humans, which we know they do. Now the 7 heads make up all the beasts foretold. Now I'm just going to take it to what they actually are listed, and there you have them. Now what you've got there is you've got the world powers of Bible history. These are the powers that held sway. In Jesus' day it was the 6th world power, Rome, wasn't it, as we know. Before that was Greece, Alexander the Great and Greece. Now many of the Greek philosophies, whoops-a-daisy, many of the Greek philosophies were starting to affect the Jews at that time. But the very first one was Egypt, then you had Assyria, Babylon, which we're familiar with, Medo-Persia, then it was Greek Rome, and the one after Rome would be the Anglo-American world power. So let's just take this question from readers, shall we? It says here, the Watchtower refers to the United Nations as being the 8th world power. Is not the Anglo-American the 7th world power, the last world power? And that's quite correct, because the beast has 7 heads. There's not an 8th head. So what is being explained? Well, what they say here is the United Nations, as the successor to the League of Nations, is a world power in that its member nations influence, and the organisation is worldwide in scope. And I believe it's got some nearly 200 member states. So it shows that it's a worldwide organisation. But it says, you see, it says the Anglo-American combine, that's the Western world, which would include Europe as well, and NATO. The Anglo-American combine nevertheless continues its powerful dominating position as the 7th world power. And of course, that's well established in history since Britain and it had an empire that ruled over 1/4 of the globe and continues to rule in a way, along with America, especially in the financial system. The Bible shows that there will only be 7 powers in this sense that correspond to the 7 heads of the wild beast. It says there are rivalry and competition between the Anglo-American world power, that is the nations of the West, including NATO. It says here as the king of the South, and the socialistic king of the North. which now, of course, not only is Russia, but really it's China as well, and the nations that are setting up a conflicting monetary system called BRICS. So it says both superpowers have cooperated along with other nations of the world with few exceptions. This produces and keeps in existence the United Nations Organization. This is the fulfillment of prophecy in the fact that the Scarlot Coloured wild beast represents the United Nations Organization. It is also said itself to be a king and springs from the seventh, and then goes off into destruction. Now, we know it only rules for 1 hour, which is a symbolic short period of time. So when this eighth king springs forth from the seventh, with the approval of all the nations of the earth, then it's a very short period of time. I'm going to show you some pictures on that in a moment. It says the beast corresponds with the 7 world powers that have been on the world scene since Egypt. And we all know Egypt with the pyramids. It says here, the United Nations is the tool used by member nations in attempting to impose a collective will upon the nations as a whole while holding on to their respective sovereignties. It says the United Nations does not have much power in itself, but not even having an army, except that the members make up a specific provision for this. In other words, its members can supply the arms, can't they? You've often seen places where they've got United Nations troops. Well, of course, they're troops from member nations who've garbed the blue hats, etc., and are ruling. And then it says this, it says, then I saw another wild beast ascending out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it began to speak like a dragon. It exercises all authority of the first world beast, that is the 7th world power. And it makes the earth and its habits worship the wild beast, whose mortal wound is healed, and it performs great signs, even making fire come down out of heaven. So what's that? Well, let's show you some pictures taken from the Revelation Climax book, published by Jehovah's Witnesses in 1988. So there it is. Now you see the beast in the background. It's a little bit like a two-horned ram, but it looks a bit more aggressive, doesn't it? But you notice it's giving power to the image of the original beast. It's scarlet, isn't it? And have you noticed that people are falling down and worshipping it? Do you remember that phrase about 666? Well, that's the number it insists that people have at the time. So you must give your political allegiance to the wild beast. Now I'm going to deviate slightly because I agree with what's been said there, but there has not been really any update on that. And I'm going to go on in the next video about the period of time that this is likely to rule for, 42 months, and I'll explain that in more detail. But what you've got here is you've got the Anglo-American wild beast, NATO, the world, with the other nations supporting it. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, is it Trump? Well, Trump is 78 years old. How will he be in 2 or 3 years' time? We don't know. Will it be a predecessor that manages to bring in the fulfillment of peace? Because that's another sign of Bible prophecy that would spring the 8th world power. This image. So when this image comes to play and rules for 1 hour, will someone like a follower of Trump be known as a man of peace? It's possibly could be Trump, and brings everybody together, and with the blessing of the United Nations establishes this new world order. We hear the words new world order from Davros, don't we? So there's a a financial connection with this as well. So let me have a look. What else have we got here? Yep. Now that the ram that I showed a picture of has got two horns. Two horns symbolises a dual world power, which is, of course, the seventh world power of Bible history, which is the Anglo-American power, and that one is the one that breathes. That one's the initiating force, breathes the force into the Scarlet Coloured wild beast. Now, what does the Scarlet Coloured wild beast do? Well, it does this. There is the wild beast, and of course there's a woman sitting on top of it. Now, she's called Babylon the Great. Now, it talks about her persecuting the prophets, and that she's a religious empire that gives support to the political setup. So this latest political setup would have full support from the world's religions, because they're all connected to the politicians, and they even pray for a blessing upon the United Nations, don't they? It does eventually say that she is turned upon by her those who she commits political adultery with, and now it's called adultery, and they devastate her. That's the destruction of Babylon the Great. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that a huge effect will come upon them because they are classified as religious. So if the political nations do turn on religion worldwide in the last moments, then Jehovah's Witnesses and anyone who's a Christian who won't have the number on their forehead, who won't give political allegiance to this new king, they, of course, will face persecution. So it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. It may be people who've listened to Jehovah's Witnesses and have decided in themselves that they won't support the political beast. There were people with regards to COVID who wouldn't be manipulated by the governments. They stood their ground. And so on this event, Jesus is looking for people who will not worship the wild beast. They will not have that number on their forehead or their palm. They will have, their allegiance will go to Jesus. Some may even put their allegiance to Jesus without even knowing all about him, but they just won't give their allegiance to the political authority. Now, the next video is going to finish this off, and it's going to connect why the 1975, 74, 75 connects with the 42 months and the lead up to Armageddon. So that's the next video. It's been a bit of a struggle for me because who can explain Revelation? You see, one of the problems people have, Christians, anyone who's a Christian who believes we're living in the last days and that know that Jesus' return is imminent and where everybody will see him, including Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe that everybody will know when Armageddon comes because Jesus' actions will affect the whole world and they will be seen to occur. So what that means is that we need to sort of know about this and be faithful. The problem is, if you're trying to understand a Bible prophecy or a number of Bible prophecies, it's very difficult to understand what they mean until they actually happen. You can speculate, of course, and we know that lots of different groups have speculated, including Jehovah's Witnesses, and you're certainly unwise to put any date. But I'll explain why they used the date 1874 and why 1974, 1975 is an interesting date. Of course, again, dates can be wrong, but I'll connect that up with the final video in this series. So, Watchtower Teachings Review. We are reviewing away. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you again. If you've missed the previous issue, it should be in the in one of those corners there, next to the subscribe button. Thank you very much. Take care. Oh. Mickey Mouse went to Disney last year. 2025 went to Disney, only the local Paris one. It's not the posh one in America or the posh 2 in America. Thank you.